It does seem like electrochemistry is a key to many, many solutions here, and it's a general question, but are we training enough electrochemists in Canada right now? Can you find the electrochemists to work on the projects?
Yeah, thanks for that. I think we'll need more. I think when we go, as we go on this journey to net zero, our one tool, I think, our one real gift is renewable electricity, and acting on that to address our chemical problems, our chemical needs, from textiles to tomatoes. We'll need a lot of people with that expertise, electrochemists. But I would also argue I'm a fan of the chemical engineers, the mechanical engineers as well, to really build those things out. But I think we do need more, and it's a great place to invest. I think one's career, if you're a young high school student.
I'm not an electrical chemist or any, but I was just wondering, can you extract carbon fiber out of, can you create carbon fiber out of the carbon that you're extracting from the atmosphere?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you. And there really has been an explosion of new carbon tech, producing carbon fiber, for instance, and other carbon-based products. We haven't, so I think the short answer is yes, we haven't focused on that area in part because we've been guided by, we want to make things that we use at the scale at which we produce CO2, if that makes sense. So, for instance, a cool technology might be making glasses or glasses frames out of CO2. I would probably buy those glasses. I would probably invest in that business. It's cool. But is it a climate solution? And to answer that question, you just have to ask how many tons of glasses did you buy last year? And if it's 0.0001 tons, it's very, very small compared to the tons of CO2 that you emitted, about 20 tons. Then you don't have a climate solution. You have a cool business and a good idea.
My only thought was, in fact, on new technology to make electricity. So, for example, there was ideas about paint that will be electrolyte, and so they don't produce CO2. Would it be better to change technology instead of, or?
One of the things that really...
Just with that, thank you. Yeah.
Sure, I will. Thank you. Yeah, it keeps me up at night. Will we have the electricity we need to do this and decarbonize cement production and steel? The technologies we need to get to 2050 rely on it. Will we have it? I'm not sure. We need lots of investment there in new transmission, and it's going to be hard. So yes, it's something to worry about, something I worry about.
No tokamak coming soon, right?
We'll see.
No.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So Daniel, allez-y. Daniel, if you want to show. Daniel presented work on lithium. So if any question there.
Hi, Daniel. I had a question about, you concentrated on the lithium you're producing, but there were other elements in there too. Is there any plans to extract other things apart from lithium?
Yeah, I mean, so we've looked at that. I mean, the one that is probably most promising is boron. I mean, it's used in borosilicate glass and ceramics. It can be used to stabilize hydrogen, so there's that industry. We haven't started investigating it because we're very focused on optimizing lithium. Res are present rare earth elements, but they're at such low concentrations, it's really hard to make a case. So, yeah, with the collaborator in University of Regina, Jamie Robbins, we're actually looking at fly ash, which has substantial concentrations of Res, and developing ion exchange. Well, you have to acidify them, and then you get a concentrate that you have to use ion exchange on. But I don't see an immediate promise, at least in the sedimentary brines I've seen, for things like rare earth elements.
I have questions, and two that maybe you're not going to like. But the first one is from your own talk. You show the lithium in powder in Chile, I think, if I remember, or Argentina, South. So you have pure lithium now. So is your approach feasible in terms of commercial presence? So in Australia, they're the biggest producer of lithium now, and they want to do even more. So how do you? I'll give you a chance to answer that.
Sure. No, that's a great question. I also have a startup company with one of my former postdocs, so we very much looked at the capital and operating expenditures, CapEx and OpEx of the process. If you look in South America, your CapEx, I mean, it's a great resource and you can be super lazy about the efficiency and you have a CapEx that's around $3,000 per ton. Our process, I mean, people say different things. Startup companies always are optimistic, but I would estimate it between $7,000 and $8,000 CapEx plus OpEx per ton in Canada in sedimentary basins. When we started doing this research, the price of lithium carbonate was around $7,000 a ton. It's past $70,000. So, you know, the margin there percentage-wise isn't gigantic. If the price does come down again, you have a good point. I mean, there's a question about. The other thing I would say quickly is, do you want a source of lithium that's sustainable, greener? I mean, there might be a price margin ultimately that can be argued for, you know, lithium from sedimentary brines that is not as environmentally intrusive.
So the second question I had is, it was a bit more scary. It's exactly what you said. You said, so we have the brine, we collect the lithium, and we trash the brine. And we know the brine contains acid. So if I understand well what your process is. So tell us a bit more in terms of environment. Is this really feasible to make it in a nice way that lithium would not, your process will not be, in fact, will be environmental friendly?
I think so. Yeah, I mean, back to the original idea is that we already have oil and gas infrastructure. So if we look in Western Canada, we did a survey. There's something approaching 1 million wells, oil and gas wells. So you have wells that are already operating. There's already been all the CO2 footprint of the installation and operation of the well is already in place. What you're doing is stepping in with the operator at their water hub, more likely, where there's more consistent supply of water and larger supply of water, and saying, wait, before you send that off to where it would have gone otherwise, which is normally injection into other deep sedimentary basins for disposal, can I please borrow that water for 3 or 4 hours, put it in my black box, which is the lithium extraction part, give it back to you. Its chemistry is identical except for you've stripped out 100 parts per million lithium. That goes on its way, but what you have for them is a side stream of revenue. And so really the only additional, yeah, sure there's energy input into it, but the only additional energy input is into operating what would be a relatively modestly sized plant to extract lithium on site.
And the water you get out from the well is not polluted also, contaminated by petroleum? Is that not an issue also?
It is, but it's already being produced. So I guess my argument is that the differential isn't really anything. If oil and gas starts to decline, then you're gonna be in a position where you actually have to drill targeted wells not to produce hydrocarbons, but to produce the brine itself, and that's a fair point. That, you know, that's an impact.
Thank you very much. Yeah, the other question there.
Cornelia Bonin, University of Victoria. Does your material have any role, or can you foresee any role in recycling lithium? And how important do you think recycling of lithium will be in the future?
That's a really good question, and we haven't started looking at that. I mean, yeah, so the recycling of batteries is something, I guess, that's fairly new, especially lithium-ion batteries. Acids are used in that process, so you do generate concentrates that they can be multi-element. The thing about these ion exchange materials is they only work up to about 400 to 500 parts per million lithium. After that, they become relatively ineffective, or you need a lot of material. What I'm saying is a fluid that contains, say, more than 500 parts per million lithium can, in many cases, go straight to electrolysis to separate out and produce lithium hydroxide, for example, or the lithium can be directly precipitated. So I think I need to understand I suspect those concentrates that are being produced out of the recycling of batteries are above that concentration. So my answer, I guess my immediate answer is probably not, but these sorts of ion exchange technologies might work for elements that are other elements in batteries that are present at lower concentrations.
Thank you very much. Oh, sorry.
I have a question regarding recyclability of the batteries. There are so many of them. Can you comment on that, please? The lithium, of course, are there any left in the batteries when they are used up? And are there any effort being done in terms of recycling?
That's right. Yeah, I mean, what's in these materials are surprisingly similar to the electrodes that are actually in the batteries themselves. They're also ion exchange materials, essentially. So yeah, I mean, what happens is these materials just degrade, or you could argue as electrodes degrade, is like, it's focused on my material, the structure begins to relax basically. And the lithium's still there, but you start losing the selectivity because those sites in the mineral aren't as optimally sized as they are. And you can see this when you do X-ray absorptions, but it's fascinating over time as we do cycle the material, it starts to relax and you see the distances between the atoms start to change. So yeah, I mean, it's not working as well as it did. It's physically different, its crystallography is different, but sure, you can extract that lithium. What you would do then is take that lithium, get it into solution, recalcine it, make a new mineral out of it, and then it would be, you know, you'd be back to the starting structure where it works again, and you could, yeah. Thank you very much.
Oh, sorry again.
Thank you. Is there any role for microbial communities for the biomineralization of lithium as an alternative strategy?
That's, yeah, I have a little bit of experience in geomicrobiology, but that's a really good question. I guess I don't really have an answer for that. I don't know much about the geomicrobiology of lithium, to be honest. You mean, yeah, I guess it's something to look into. You mean in terms of the isolation of lithium from the brines? It's hard to imagine that. I'm just thinking of the surface chemistry of microbes. I mean, lithium has a very low affinity for the surface functional groups on microbes, and I'm not aware of any lithium metabolisms that we could lean on, or, you know, but I might be wrong about that. I guess I need to talk to a proper microbiologist.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Please join us. So Arthur was talking about the brain and synapse, mainly in silico, I think. But that's a bit my question to start. So have you model your calculations on a real brain, or have you modeled the live model for that?
Yes. So we did simulations on artificial neural networks, this rule, and we tried on some standard data sets used by machine learning community, and it performed as good as the top level other algorithm. So probably this is not yet full story, because I'm giving this talk and not my computer is giving this talk. It means that we didn't yet succeed to make those smarter. Yeah. So it is, I think, step in good directions, but it's not yet full story.
So I work a bit in neuroscience, and we look at you know, object recognitions and see if it's. So one issue I have with what you said is that you said the mass, if you have more blood flow, you have an increased mass of neurons, and this will automatically give, you didn't say automatically, but that you seems to suggest that there would be a more efficient brain. Is that, am I correct to say that?
I was just quickly sketching how neuron is getting energy, that to get more energy, neurons needs to stimulate blood vessels, so blood vessels expand. And this is how, when we are making, for example, fMRI images, it is that we are not monitoring neurons, but rather this blood flow. And because we're monitoring blood flow, because when neurons are more active, those blood vessels expand. So I was just saying that to expand those blood vessels, coordinated activity of neurons is needed. So this was one of the...
But my understanding of the idea of intelligence is that neurons have to die also. So they make connections. Some die and some survive. And the death of some of the neurons are extremely important for thinking and effective learning. So you don't have that in your model.
Yes, so definitely with dealing with your question, some of my neurons are dying all the time now, but this is very minuscule level. So the level of neurons which normally die every day, it's negligible comparing to total number of neurons you have. So this is not something that neuroscientists are concerned on.
Okay, so I should have drank more wine yesterday night. Anybody with questions on this? No.
The public perception, there's lots of concern around artificial consciousness and artificial intelligence becoming too powerful. What's your assessment of that? Is there no reason to worry about that? Or what's your message to those folks?
Yeah, so
That's a good question.
Like with every technology, like with nuclear energy, it can be used for good and for bad. I'm working on this because I'm optimistic that this technology will be used for good. But you know, it's possible that it may get us extinct. So that's a real possibility.
Oh, it's just before lunch. It's a good concept. You know what you're saying. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's good. So Jane Hederman. So we talk about disease, prediction, epidemiology. Anybody has a question?
Yeah, I had a question about, I think the results then really exciting and the predictive power. Do you have a hard time conveying these results to the general public and, for example, convincing people of quality of vaccinations or the need for it, that sort of thing?
Certainly with some political movements and just feelings of the burden of public health control and government messaging, sometimes it is difficult to convey the results that we get from our mathematical models to the public, though I found that during COVID and like even pre-COVID, when we're looking at other infectious diseases, having public panels or Café Mathématiques that we offer online through the Fields Institute or the other institutes, where we have people either come to the institutes or log in via Zoom to ask questions, have been very helpful. Also in terms of going to give library talks or go to schools, when you educate the young, they question their parents, and then the parents are also more apt to read and learn about what's going on as well. So sometimes it's hard when I have large graphs like that, but we can make things simpler, and we can even involve activities and thinking activities into these presentations to get people to understand really what we're conveying.
May I ask you, so in the case of influenza, so with COVID, you're following the trends. Influenza, when you prepare a vaccine for the next year, so is your model, the way you do the modeling, is important in these design of predicting that it will work at 40%, and if you can say a few things like this. I'm always confused about how you can predict the future virus coming out. So I'm not sure if this is helpful or not.
Sure. So one thing that we do look at in my lab is looking at the evolution of different viral variants or strains of different pathogens over time. We try to use machine learning and clustering to identify families of viruses that are popping up and try to project which ones will be more dominant, I guess, during the flu seasons. One issue with the flu vaccine is that we do need 6 months to produce it. The way that it's produced, it requires a lengthy amount of time, but with new vaccines, new vaccine technologies that require less time, we could have better vaccine efficacy because we'll have a better idea of what flu strains will be dominant during flu season. But what's important about this is that as flu strains are evolving, and when we get new pandemic strains, they're usually also related to past strains that the population has been exposed to. And we experienced this with 2009 H1N1, that there was some component of that influenza pandemic strain that was related to a past strain that individuals who are older already had some immunity against. And so that's why we really do try to quantify what the immunity is, or the effective level of immunity in a population against all these different pathogens.
Okay. So your modeling helps in the public policy.
Yeah.
Did it happen in your experience that you predict things or you propose things, and then a public policy comes in and it's in fact killing your modeling, or affecting the reverse directions? Have you seen this in your data set? So.
Yep, certainly there have been things that we've projected that don't come to light because we've been able to inform public policy, and public policy has changed and messaging has changed to the public. And that's one question that we always get is your model wrong? Was it really wrong? Or how do you explain when your model is wrong? But sometimes our model is wrong just because behavior changed. And I think that that's a positive effect of the information that we've provided.
It's certainly a nice way to answer that the discrepancy, that's for sure. Anybody have a second? Yes, question there. Oh.
Hi, Jane, thanks for a great talk. So I guess just to follow up on Michelle's question, I mean, how much do these models assume that the individuals, the immune system in the individuals are like rational players, like a sort of in a game theoretical sense? Like, is there some assumption, like hidden assumption, that there's some kind of rational, behavior of each individual in your model kind of thing?
So we assume that the individuals are rational, but the immune system is a reaction to just a perturbation of the immune response in the body. But we do involve, we know distributions of comorbidities by age in the population. And so and we know that comorbidities are a surrogate of are giving us a good idea of the probability of having a mild, a moderate, or a severe infection. And those comorbidity distributions change as you age as well. And so we can use that information to inform our models that these statistics exist. And so we can look at these probabilities, which then allow us to project in our large population models what the immune response will look like in those individuals. But then when we look at the in-host models, we're really trying to understand what those key differences are in individuals that have specific comorbidities and how your immune system and how your immune response changes with age. And that's just key to your biology, your genetics, whether you're male or female. And those are key characteristics that mathematics can help tease out of immunology measurements that are really difficult to measure in the lab, but using these connective networks, math can tease out information that we can't model or that we can't measure or are very hard to measure.
So I have a question about the data inputs for your modeling, because you can only predict, of course, if you have sound data on which to rest your predictions. And surveillance data has changed dramatically. For example, during COVID-19, in the early days, we saw individual surveillance. Then we moved to wastewater surveillance, which, of course, is much less specific. So what are the public policy implications of surveillance and monitoring?
That's a good question. Data is always a very sensitive topic to discuss with people in various jurisdictions and different levels of government. It's very hard to get access to very good data in Canada just because of the way that health data is governed and owned by individuals and provincial governments and how they're shared between federal and provincial and so on. But we've been very lucky with COVID that data sharing has been better than in the past. Data reporting has been daily versus weekly. From previous pandemics, we've only seen weekly data. But there's always more data out there that can help to inform our mathematical models, which will then be able to give us the ability to shed light on some things that we don't actually observe. And so in terms of data availability, and how it's changed, we're going from aligning or informing our models with case testing data to hospitalization data and death data by age, but now to wastewater data. There are trends that we can always test statistically to compare the wastewater data to other data sets that we've had in the past, and then we can try to translate that. So one thing that I'm involved in is I'm a scientific director or advisor to the COVID Immunity Task Force, and one thing that the modeling group there is trying to do is translate wastewater data to measures of seroprevalence, and we can only do that because we've also been really informed in the past by testing data, death data, and hospitalization data as well.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Oh, yeah, another question for Jane? Please,
I
sorry.
have a question.
Just one more. Several others.
Okay, how large does the population set have to be for your model to be applicable? And can you include other restrictions besides the demographics that you talked about, age and so on? Can you include other restrictions like spatial localization, particular working environments, and so on?
Yeah. So the results that I showed you today are from deterministic models, and so they're for large populations, but we also do have variations of these models that involve stochasticity for smaller populations. And so we can really look at, differences between rural and urban areas, and even looking at how a commuting behavior and work from home changes outcomes. We can also, in terms of geographic locations, we can understand how public health policy is going to affect contact matrices differently in urban and rural areas. Also during the pandemic, we've really tried to use very simple models to try to inform needs for personal protective equipment, for ordering personal protective equipment for different jurisdictions, as well as what the demand would be for ICU and ward beds. And we really did try to use postal code information that we could get from some of the data sets that we got to look at how that would change over time in these different geographic areas that have different access to care, that have different age distributions, and different types of workers that were going to be exposed to the pathogen more often or less often.
When COVID started, there was a lot of modeling activities, and they were all seemingly based on a 100-year-old model, SIR model. Has there been experience now about how well the model has behaved, or has the variance overtaken it, so it's not quite clear?
I'm not sure I heard everything that you said, but I can say that in terms of the theory that disease modeling is based on is even more than 100 years old, but that SIR model was developed in the 1920s. But one thing that is really interesting about what all the activity that's been happening during COVID is that we have lots of modeling teams across the country and in provinces, et cetera, that are informing the different jurisdictions and different government agencies. And so when another modeler develops a totally different model to mine and comes up with the same result, that's comparable to what my models are saying, then we have power in that result. And so that's what these consensus tables were doing during the pandemic. But I'll just say, that basic SIR model has existed for a long time, but informing larger extended models with all these different levels of like age and geographic region, ethnicity, and so on. Those are things that we can only really do with the availability of data. And there's been so much data lately that we've really been able to advance mathematical epidemiology and immunology during COVID.
Thank you, Jane. We'll have to move on. John, it's your turn. Let's talk about volcano. I was going to clap at the end for everybody. We'll do that too. So digging into a volcano, how did you look at that?
So I'm just wondering, is there for the brines containing the metals, I mean, obviously there's volcanoes, interplate volcanoes, there's subduction zone volcanoes, there's mid-ocean ridge volcanoes. So which ones right now look most promising in terms of the brine concentrations and also other aspects?
Yeah, that's a good question. The most promising ones are arc volcanoes. Interestingly, rift volcanoes could be richer sources of rare earth. And then mid-ocean ridges, Ascension has preliminary estimates from the petrology of rocks and inclusions from Ascension look really good also. So in the UK, we're quite interested in Ascension and St. Helena because of, I mean, they're a constant draw on money for the UK government. So.
That's interesting. Thank you very much.
I have a question which is not so scientific. So you are working in places sometimes that are out in the rural area. And is there a pushback from the population around that they hear that they're digging in the volcano? You understand what I mean? Is it? I think it's not innocuous that people will be against the project, for example. So you have experience of how do you interact with the population then?
Yeah, we've, I mean, I wouldn't say I have extensive experience, but I've worked on numerous volcanoes all through East Africa. Many are being developed right now. Aluto, one of the ones I showed you, has Ethiopia's first geothermal power plant. Corbeti, another one, is just had a huge investment from the World Bank. Kenya is also really developed, and they're following Iceland's model really to have a combination of hydro and geothermal to remove their dependency on fossil fuel. The people, so Aluto, they farm right through the caldera around the entire volcano. No pushback. I think the saddest thing about Aluto is the electricity that's generated from that power plant doesn't go to any of the people around them because they can't get into the grid. So there's, in developing countries, there's these other issues of how to equitably, provide the electricity. But I haven't, in my experience, it's not
a major issue.
No, it's where there is much more pushback is when you propose a new copper mine in equatorial rainforest in Ecuador or a new lithium mine in Serbia. Basically, the social license is not there.
Well, some of our mines, even from Canadian companies, don't have such a good reputation either. So we'll have to say that. Okay, one last question, and we go to the next one.
Thanks, John, for your talk. Can you remind us how volcanoes concentrate these metals? I didn't catch that. Like, what is it about a volcano that brings these metals to high concentration so they can then be mined?
Right. So when the essentially you're heating the mantle that's in the example I used being subducted, fluids are being driven off, volatiles, and as long as they are saline, as long as they have NaCl in them, they react really well with a plethora of different minerals and metals, and they effectively concentrate them in the core of the volcano. And that's, for example, a copper mine. If you're looking for a supergene deposit, that's what you're trying to mine out was that concentration. So the earth it's a reactive process. Yeah. Just very quickly, somebody asked about microbes, and there's somebody in my department, Julie Cosmides, who's using microbes to scavenge waste products to produce lithium, but specifically sulfur-based lithium batteries, actually. So you use microbes to grow them. So I think that's another really exciting area in this region.
Okay. Thank you very much. Keith, I think Keith, it's appropriate that you finish with the session. Scientists, and you mentioned there were data on your questionnaire for science and university too. So I think it's important to look at mental health. There's no doubt.
Thank you. Although I know you should never stand between a group of people and their lunch break or
That's also
coffee
mental
break.
health. Yeah, I agree. Any question for Keith? Yes.
Yeah, thanks. I really enjoyed your talk. Often people that are suffering from sort of mental health issues or well-being issues at work are the least likely to come forward and get help. So how do you, in the environment, in this group work, how do you I guess address that?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. The field of mental health stigma has actually grown quite a lot in recent years. I'll recommend, if you're interested, there's a book that a colleague of mine, Heather Stewart, and I published just last year on the stigma of mental illness, which talks about this in various contexts. But we talk about 3 different types of stigma. We talk about public stigma, which is the negative attitudes that we may have towards other people with mental health problems. We talk about personal stigma or private stigma, which is the internalized stigma that people have towards themselves and the ways in which they might self-handicap or self-limit the things that they can do because of their own embarrassment or potentially, some of the signs or signals they're experiencing. And then we talk about social stigma or organizational stigma, basically. So the systems that operate that actually make it more difficult for people with mental illness to function well in those systems. So that could be things like insurance policies or leave policies in different organizations and so on. And so to go back to your question, basically it's a combination of all of those factors, those three different types of stigma that are influencing and will affect the behavior of the individual and whether or not he or she feels that they can function in that setting, must leave the setting, can be open with certain people but not other people, and all of the various dynamics that can operate. So it's a very challenging problem.
Thank you very much. Oh, one last question, then we have to...
Question about wearing masks. So government of Alberta is saying that it's preventing from obligatory mask wearing. So how is there any evidence for that wearing mask is affecting mental health and development of kids and people?
Yes. So this is a topic that's going on. And the answer generally that I understand is no, that there is really no link between wearing masks or not and stigma. It's very interesting. There was actually a paper that was published just at the very outset of the pandemic looking at long-term effects, the behavioral psychological effects of pandemics. And one of the things that they predicted in that, and again, it wasn't tied to COVID because it was published actually just before, but it was a review of other things like the SARS pandemic, for example. And the question was, are there long-term implications for stigma in particular? And what they suggested is that only if the individuals who are identified can be somehow noted or identified, and again, the word stigma, of course, means a sign or a signal, so only if those people can somehow be identified can you potentially have stigma. Mental illness doesn't have visible signs. Wearing a mask is a sign. Yeah. So again, there is a risk potentially there, but there is some work going on in the area of stigma related to mask wearing, and to the best of my knowledge, it's not been, with COVID-19, it's not been associated with stigmatization.
Keith, thank you very much. I want
you.
to thank all the speakers who finished on time. You were great. It was very diverse, exciting, all talks, and I wish you a good lunch and to continue the day with stay. So thank you very much, and the next time to continue. Thank you. Yeah.